I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding 2022 AR 2022-332, appropriating $50,650,000 of SEMT program revenues for capital projects. It is Friday, November 4, 2022. We are scheduled from 11:50 a.m. until 12:50 p.m. We will start by going around the room here with Assembly member introductions.
Pete Peterson.
Kevin Cross.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance, and on the phone, I believe we have Mr. Rivera
Felix Rivera.
and Mr. Boland.
Daniel Bowen.
Is there anyone else on the phone? Okay, thank you. And then also from the administration, we have here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amy DeBosky, Municipal Manager.
Adam Trumbull, Chief of Staff.
Courtney Peterson, Director, Office of Management and Budget.
Doug Schrage, Fire Chief.
Thank you.
And in the audience, we do have a number of subject matter experts that are here to assist us in our conversation today. Police Chief Mike Curl is here. Ben Bowman from the Department of Law is here. Acting Municipal Attorney Blair Christensen is here. Saxton Shear is also here on behalf of MNO. So as we go through the presentation, we will bring different people up to help answer your questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Domboski. I want to note too that documents for this work session are available online. If you go to muni.org/worksessions and scroll down to this work session, you can find the presentation that we're about to see from the administration, the resolution AR 2022-332, and then I believe we are working to get the other documents online, which includes an unnumbered AO and a lease agreement. I want to note that AR 2022-332 is item 14J on the regular meeting November 9 agenda, and that regular meeting happens to be on a Wednesday. And with that, I will turn to Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Assembly. Today's conversation in part will be a quick recap, but then it'll be an opportunity to go through the appropriation request and talk about specifics within that request. And we hope to do this in a very organized and methodical fashion. Chief Schrage is going to be instrumental in helping me in today's presentation. He will not suit his time, so I will do it for him. He helped carry the state legislation which brought SEMT this reimbursement to Alaska. And so he is quite famously the subject matter expert on this topic. So let's start with the history, some of the revenue we've received to date, and some of the revenue that we're anticipating. First, I'll start with Chief Schrage. If you could give us a brief overview of SEMT, what it is, and then just kind of walk us through kind of the process AFD goes through to get this reimbursement, the calculation process, and then we can start talking about the revenues.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, a brief overview of the SEMT program. The GEMT, Ground Emergency Medical Transport Program, is a federal program that was passed into law in 2010. In Alaska, we call it SEMT because in Alaska, there are communities that provide patient transportation by mechanisms other than ground ambulance. And so ours might include dog sled or boats or aircraft. But in Alaska, the SEMT was passed into law in 2018. This is House Bill 176, which by passing this legislation enabled communities in Alaska to tap into this supplemental reimbursement program. What GEMT or SEMT does is it enables communities to recover the unreimbursed cost of transporting Medicaid beneficiaries. So when we pick up a patient and transport them to the hospital in our ambulance, the Medicaid will reimburse just a portion of the actual cost of those services, similar to a physician's visit or other medical services. The regulations which followed the passage of the law were signed into effect in 2019, and we began eligibility to recover those costs as of August of 2019. So since then, we have submitted annual cost reports to the state for 2019, 2020, and just recently 2021. The process is as follows. We complete a cost calculation identifying the actual cost of all the services that contribute to providing a patient transport. We submit those to the state. They do a bench review or a desk review of our calculations. There may be some back and forth with some clarifications, and then they issue an interim payment. We have thus far received 2 interim payments for the partial year of 2019 and for the year 2020. The state now has 3 years from the date of the payment to do a more complete audit and make a payment adjustment within 3 years from now. So that could be an increase in revenue, or in some cases could result in a deficit where we would have to pay some money back. We have formed our calculations in such a way that it's very conservatively applied and minimizes the risk that we'll ever have to pay any of this back. I can take any questions.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So those conservative estimates, did they end at 15.65, or is there more money that's not being appropriated in this plan within your estimate?
The 15.65 is in the estimate, so that's based on what we actually received in 19 and 20. So we received the 2019 and 2020 figures as revenue. So in the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting, that was the revenue that Treasurer Dan Moore had told us about, and so those are those 2 payments that we've already received. So we're just appropriating a portion of those revenues that were received. It's not based on this isn't based on estimates.
So what's the estimate number?
Are you saying when they factor in their?
The total estimate. So this isn't the whole portion you said. This is what we've gotten so far, but there might be more money coming. So what's the total estimate?
No, we're not expecting to receive any further money. Annually, we have is what's in the budget, and we budgeted at 10.5, and that's where it's the estimate of trying to estimate how much the state may hold back from giving us, and then as you can see, it is a little bit of a adjustment each year as far as what they can turn in for reimbursement. So in 2020, they were able to submit 18 million. In 2021, it was only 12 or almost 13 million. So the estimate is in the budgeting section. It's not the estimate of what we've actually received.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misread that that thing at the top. So, but yeah, so this 15.65 is not. We've already received 23.
Yes.
And we estimate another 12 million in 2021. And then there should be also 2022, right? We don't build 2022, we do the 2023 budget. So what's the 2022 estimate?
No, so the way that it works is you can't submit until after your 2022 is closed and you finish your completed financials. And then the state has 2 quarters to reimburse you. So we would have to finish our financials and submit our reimbursement before June of 2022 in order to, or 2023 in order to get 22 in 23. And so the expectation is we're not going to be able to fulfill that. You know, our books haven't closed before June for a few years. And so the expectation is we won't be able to submit our 2022 to the state for reimbursement until maybe the 3rd quarter of 23. And then that's kind of the cycle we're on, and that's how we're budgeting.
But that still means that there is likely another sort of windfall that could come from 2022 that is not currently built into the 2023 budget. It's something we need to pursue over the next 18 months or whatever the time frame is.
Yeah, I would say it's unlikely that we're going to be able to submit our 2022 to the state in time to get it in 2023.
Right. So we're going to get it in 2024.
Yes.
But the point is that there's still money in 2022 money out there too.
There will be, and that would be part of how we're annually budgeting. We plan on continuing the annual appropriation of that SEMT funding each year. So that's what's in for 2023, and then 2024 would be the expectation of 2022 revenues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next is Mr. Boland and then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So I believe, I'm trying to pull it up. I'm having difficulty here, but in the resolution 2022-332, where we are appropriating $15.6 million, I thought in the language it had said that we had received closer to 19.6, so I'm wondering about the delta there. And I'm also wondering what happens with funds that are not appropriated for capital expenses. Do those lapse into the general fund, or what happens if we don't use all the money?
Okay, I'll take that one question, and Courtney will correct me if I'm wrong. So yes, Mr. Boland, the money would lapse into the general fund, right? If we don't appropriate it. So if you continue on in that sentence that you're reading about 19.620 million on line 16, page 1 of AR 2022-332, if you go a little bit further in that sentence, we've actually received $23,820,238 of SEMT money. And that is for the half of year of 2019, once this bill was adopted, and then it was the full year of 2020. So those revenues came in a little higher than we had actually projected. And that is, so the total bucket, if you will, of money that we received was 23 million. Now of that 23 million, if you look at the municipality of Anchorage's 2020 budget, they had budgeted 4.2 million. That's what they thought they might receive for SEMT. Obviously, we received a lot more than 4.2 million. So I think that's where some of the confusion might be coming in, the difference between what we actually budgeted versus what we actually received. Does that help?
That definitely helps. I guess my follow-up question would be then, is there a plan for the rest of that money, or we just want that to go into the general fund?
So through the chair, Mr. Boland, that's part of the discussion we're having. This is the first year. I think multiple years the Assembly has appropriated, or in their budget, they've budgeted for SEMT money. But because the state didn't adapt the regulations until January of this year, the program wasn't able to distribute funds. This is the first year it's actually distributing funds. So now it's kind of like a test. As we do our calculations and we submit to the state, we're seeing how they're adjusting our numbers so we can give you more accurate numbers going forward. But that's part of the discussion. Since this windfall is so much bigger than what we had budgeted, we felt that it was a real opportunity to make some headway into some critical capital improvement items that we're going to discuss today in order to kind of catch up on some of our maintenance and some of our different projects that have not been able to be funded, frankly. So that's part of the discussion. That's the kind of the whole purpose of the discussion today.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I may have some questions later. That does help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Next is Mr. Peterson and Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so is the plan going forward that if we start receiving these reimbursements annually in late 23 or 24 or whenever, it's just going to go in as part of the general budget for the fire department? Is that the plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, not for the fire department, just like APD, when they write tickets or, other city services that collect revenue, it goes back to the general fund, and then it's up to the Assembly to decide how that money should be spent. In this case, and I'd like to point out 2021, for example, and this is the part, Mr. Dunbar had the same question that I had for Courtney, actually, because I was going round and round going, but there's another payment, where is it? We actually budgeted in next year's budget $10.5 million, because remember, we budgeted that before we ever got a reimbursement. So that was our best conservative guess. As you look, once they did the calculations for 2021, they're calculating, AFD is calculating, we think we're gonna get about 12.9 million. So we think we're very close, but again, that's up to the state. So because they have 2 cycles to pay us, we should get that check somewhere around July, late June or July of next year, because we submitted it by October of this year, so they have two quarters to pay us. So that's why, as you look at this now, you shouldn't be looking at it as, okay, but we're gonna get 2022, because every year has to close. We can't submit until we have the audited financial number, and then we submit. So we're now, I think, on a cycle where this is the number that really you should be looking at as next year. What did we budget? We budgeted 10.5 in this year's budget because we thought that was close. The state can discount it. They can change it. And so that's why we think this is a conservative estimate, and I'm actually very pleased that the fire department came in close to the number that we calculated because we think we're very close to being right. Does that help?
Yeah, great. So instead of it going into the fire department's budget, it goes into the general fund of the city's budget then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. Mr. Busquet, I'm not sure I understood exactly what you said. The $4.2 million you said was in the 2020 budget?
Oh, I probably said the wrong number. I meant 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And just a quick clarifying question, just so I'm tracking. I thought I heard it said that so far we have received partial payments for both 2019 and 2020, and then in the AR, it says 23,820,000 or so received, which would be the total of the full amounts of 2019 and 2020.
I think the confusion is we have received the full reimbursements for 2019 and 2020. I think some of, and if I said it wrong, I apologize, but 2019 was only half of a year because the legislature hadn't passed the bill yet. Then they passed the bill became active, so only half of 2019 was available. But again, the regulations weren't adopted until January of this year. So we had a couple of back payments that were due to us, and that was half of 2019 and 2020. Now we have submitted for 2021, so I think we're pretty much caught.
Got it, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
So I'm still trying to understand the numbers. So I'm never trust my math. So 23,820, 28 million received. 4.2 million budgeted, which takes us to roughly $19 million.
Yeah.
Subtract the 15,650. What's the delta? Now I know the number. It's 3,970,230.
That's the delta.
And where is that?
In the general fund. Well,
It's yet to be appropriated, so it'll allow, we've received it, we haven't done anything with it,
Okay,
right?
so that's outside of what's proposed. There's a remainder of 3.9 million.
Correct.
Okay, almost 4 million. Okay, that's now I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any other questions before we move on? Great.
all right, thank you, Madam Chair and Assembly members. So the bottom part of this slide just demonstrates for you Section 1 of AR 2022-332 is for fire engine replacement. Section 2 is for fire ladder truck replacement. Section 3, $2 million would be an initial down payment for the 716 building, which is now the police department headquarters. And then Section 4 talks about the major facility roof replacements. That's 2.3 million, just about. And then last but not least is the Anchorage area-wide radio network AMORN system. That is Section 5. That's Section 5. I just want to preface this discussion with that is not in your packet today. I've asked the Assembly leadership for an executive session on that topic, so that will not be discussed today. But as we go through the presentation here, we're going to go through line by line. So we're going to start with the fire department, and Chief Struggy's here to kind of outline for everyone what the needs are of the department and why we're making the fleet requests that we are for the fire department.
And if I may just note for the record that we were joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson at 12:11, and then also Mr. Solt, you joined at noon, and I may not have noted that. Anyone else walking in the door? All right, thank you. Go ahead, Chief Struggy.
Okay. Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. You stated for section 3 it's an initial down payment. Did you just mean down payment, or did you mean there will be more than one down payment?
Courtney, do you want to take that one? Or Blair?
There will not be more than one down payment, just
Okay.
one down payment.
Okay.
It was just this is the initial payment.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So through the chair, we are in a condition now where we have a critical need to replace quite a significant portion of our fleet. This is due to several factors. Partly the fact that over the years we have not kept up with our replacement schedule, coupled with supply chain issues and increased demand in the industry for fire apparatus manufacture that has extended out the life of our replacement to the point where we have pushed out beyond critical mass. We are really behind the power curve on our apparatus. Our apparatus have become expensive to operate, unreliable, with frequent breakdowns and swap outs. And 5 of our 14 engines in service today are old enough that they're beyond 15 years old and should be in reserve status. 2 of our 4 aerial trucks are in the same condition we currently have reserves in place as frontline apparatus because our fleet is so old. Our typical service life is 15 years in frontline service and another 10 years in reserve status. So currently, as you can see, we have 7 of 18 companies depicted there are beyond their frontline service life, and our reserve fleet is also inadequate. Next slide, please. So just for everybody's edification, we distinguish between engines and trucks. Engines are bumper trucks like you see in the picture there. We have 14 engines in service every day. They are listed in this table in order of age. And as you can see, the older the apparatus are and the more miles that they accrue, the more expensive they become to operate. The colored bars on the right side is a Gans-like chart which shows that the desired lifespan of our apparatus. The green ones are frontline units that are appropriately in service within their expected 15-year time frame. The yellow ones are ones that are beyond 15 years old and should really be reverted to reserve status. But as you can see, we have 5 of them up there that we're using reserve trucks engines rather as frontline engines. So complicating this is our reserve fleet is wholly inadequate. The reserve fleet is used when an engine needs to come into the shop for periodic maintenance or service or repairs, or it has been in a collision and needs to be fixed. We take one of our reserve fleet and we stand it up for temporary duty. Our entire reserve fleet is manufactured by a company called KME, which went out of business a couple of years ago. We cannot get parts for these trucks, these engines anymore, and we have to have them custom manufactured, which is very, very expensive and time consuming. By 2025, almost our entire reserve fleet will exceed 150,000 miles per vehicle. What we're proposing to do with the engines is replace, you can see it in the yellow bars up there, replace the first, let me back up. We have 2 engines that are currently being constructed, and those will be put into service in 2025. It now takes about 30 months for a new engine to be produced and delivered. We're planning then to replace 3 engines. We'd like 4, but we have proposed funding for 3 from the SEMT funding. If we order those tomorrow, we wouldn't receive them until 2026. And so that's why it's critical that we get after this right now. We also are looking for 2 trucks. Well, we'll get to the trucks page. Okay, there we go.
Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. So we have 4 aerials in service, which we call trucks. Truck 12, Truck 1, Truck 5, and Truck 3, they're depicted there in order of age. We have 2 trucks that are being constructed right now, and we expect delivery before the end of this year. These were, there's actually an error on this slide, which is my fault. These were bonded in 2020 and 2021, and they should be in service by the end of 2022. Those are the bottom 2. Those are replacements for Truck 3 and Truck 5. Truck 3 and Truck 5 are currently operating in reserve trucks. The other 2, Trucks 12 and 1, are currently within their 15-year lifespan, but for various reasons, they are our most unreliable and most expensive to operate. They have the most amount of downtime. So that is what we're proposing. We're proposing the engines and 2 aerials with the SEMT funding.
And Madam Chair, if I could just follow on, I want to highlight a couple of things that Chief Shaggy had commented to. First, when we originally put this together, our engines generally cost about $800,000 a piece. Within 3 months of us getting this reimbursement and putting this together, the price has skyrocketed to $1.2 million a piece. And we're in negotiations right now with the vendor and seeing the fire department has been very successful at driving down the cost a little bit. But if we do a bulk purchase, we may be able to drive that cost down more. So our initial ask was for 4 engines at that $3.2 million. We now know that $3.2 million will likely not cover 4 engines. So it's one of those things where the supply chain, the cost, all of these things are becoming critical factors. Not to mention the fact the actual fleet and the usage of the fleet. If we wait to put some of these rigs on the bond in April, we're waiting another 6 to 8 months before we can get going. And frankly, this fleet is in such a situation, it is really critical. So that's why we're coming forward and asking for a capital appropriation for fire vehicles with the SEMT money.
Can I have just a slight review? Can we go back? This is the slide I want to...
Oh, you want that one?
Yeah, this one right here. I just want to draw your attention to the top 11 lines there. All of those are KME engines that are in service today that are no longer supported by the manufacturer. We can't get parts. There are many parts that we can't get for those rigs. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Shargi, and thank you, Ms. Dembowski. I have 2 members in the queue. First is Mr. Solt and Mr. Dunbar.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Chief, a couple questions for you. If I understand it right, for engines, you have 5 in reserve, and that's your plan, and then trucks, you have 2 in reserve? Or your ideal state?
Would it be appropriate for me to call on one of my staff to answer that question? Chief Arch, or what's our desired reserve fleet?
How many are in reserve?
How many would you desire
Get a
trucks and
microphone.
engines?
Come on up and sit down.
Let's get you a microphone.
Here we go.
The question is, what is the desired state of our reserve fleet? How many engines and trucks should we have?
Well, being that we have 4 trucks in service and then the engine capacity, it's always ideal to have 2 aerial ladder trucks in reserve and typically 3 to 4 engines in reserve status. Because what that does is it allows us to work with our preventative maintenance schedule and bringing rigs in, and then just every so often if something else was to get damaged and have a long-term fix, we have extras beyond that. But definitely the 2 are specific to the preventative maintenance schedule.
And I'll add for the record, this is Assistant Chief Brian Parch.
Thank you. And then, well, let's get you to we had this discussion with APE the other day around similar situation. We haven't been keeping up on vehicle replacement. Well, let's get you kind of to that sweet spot where your maintenance costs are in line versus replacement.
Yes.
Okay. And last question around when you take a reserve unit and surplus it, what happens to that? I mean, Member Cross made the comment to me that since parts are hard to get, I assume that that reserve old equipment is valuable to somebody for parts, or do you just surplus it open market, or?
Yes, thank you for the question, Assemblymember Salt, through the chair. Yes, well, first of all, we have a little boneyard where some of these older rigs are, and we scavenge as many parts off of them as we can. If there are rigs that are still functional but not serviceable, given the amount of use that we put on them, we sell them to other communities around the state. I think, and in some cases we donate them. I think we gave one to Moose Pass and Kodiak recently.
Thank you, Mr. Soul. Next is Mr. Dunbar, then Mr. Cross, and then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the one hand, I understand why we want to keep most of the SMT money in the fire department, SEMT, sorry, because obviously you generated it. All as the municipal manager pointed out, it goes in the general fund. It's colorless money. We could actually spend it on anything, same as tickets to the police raid. And the chart showing the engines makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it seems why we don't seem to be able to keep up with maintenance of our bonds. The aerials, the next page doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like all of this is green, and we have two new ones coming on. And I understand that there are some higher maintenance costs with the other two, but they are to be bonded next year. We could also shift that bond up to this year very easily, and we've never had, with one exception, where a group of former mayors made it their business to knock down some ambulances, which I don't think is going to happen to this administration. We've never had fire bonds fail, right? So to a certain degree, why aren't we focusing this on things that we don't think we can get through the bonds? And why don't we move up the timeline for the aerials to this year's bond and bond for them, knowing that people of Anchorage are going to support them if we think we need them in that time frame?
Thank you, Assemblymember Dunbar, through the chair. So 2 points. So the reason everything is green on the chart that we're looking at there is because the bottom two trucks, that depicts the ones that we expect to get, the brand new ones that go into service in 2022. So by the end of this year, you're correct, they'll all be green. We're hoping to replace the top two as well. We'd like to sell them while they still have value and replace them with more reliable rigs. And quite frankly, one of the rigs requires 2 drivers, and we'd like to replace it with one that only requires 1 because it'll be cheaper to operate.
So I guess I'm not pushing back on the idea that we need to replace these. I'm wondering why we need to use this source of funds as opposed to the bond, which was the plan, right? So we planned it to bond for these in 2023. We could easily add that to this year's bond and then be in the same place in terms of funding and getting these apparatuses.
Again, through the chair, our total ask between the SEMT funding and the April ballot proposition for the bond is 6 engines and 2 aerials. So in the SEMT resolution is proposed 4 engines and 2 trucks. And in the April election is proposed for the other 2 engines.
Okay, I guess I still have a sort of philosophical issue with this. And also, we were planning to bond for these in 2023. We could still do that, it sounds like, if we don't want to move it up to 2022. Again, the people of Anchorage support fire bonds overwhelmingly, usually. And so this is a sort of unique pot of money and I guess my preference is to not use it just to offset bonds. That being said, the other chart is very clear. The bonds haven't kept up with the engines, so totally makes sense. But the aerials, I'm just not sure if that's the most strategic use of this really unique source of funds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next is Mr. Cross and then Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, just to build off what Forrest said, I understand, I guess, naturally with any bond, there's a risk. So we got a couple things I'm thinking about here. One is the time, and that depending on how long you put off ordering them, I don't imagine these would get less expensive, considering our time of rapid inflation. The time delay of I guess you would order, if this passes, I guess my question is how soon would you be able to put in that PO or that request, an order for the fire trucks?
So remember, through the chair, I understand your question to be how quickly could we order them?
How quickly would you order if this passes? Because, otherwise you're not ordering until the bond passes. So I'm kind of curious what that delay looks like and take into consideration cost, effect, and then when they would actually arrive, push it out 6 months. I mean, I'm just trying to get an idea of any action that we take and the unintended consequences of pushing the problem down the road when everything gets more expensive. And what would the order process look like when this passes?
I am not able to say how long it would take us for the purchasing machinery and all of that to effectuate the purchase. But if we were to order them tomorrow, it would take 30 months, is what we're hearing from the manufacturers, for them to arrive here and be put in service. Okay.
So ultimately, if this were to pass, we could start the purchasing process right away. So we can start getting the bids, the PO, and all of that. If we wait for the bonds, the vote isn't what determines it. We have to wait for the certification, and then we come back to you guys for the actual appropriation of the projects. And so ultimately, that wouldn't start until May for the purchasing process after the bonds were approved. And so you're talking about the difference between now and May.
All right, 8% annual inflation in 6 months at 4%. Okay, and then whether or not that's a cost factor or not. And then just more of a statement than otherwise. To build off, Randy stole my thunder on that one, but if we have these fire trucks that they don't make parts for, it seems to me like there would be a huge market for that. As far as finding and talking to the manufacturer, who they sold other rigs to, and finding out who has these still operating, and then when those get decommissioned, selling those for parts or something. I do understand supporting our local communities that are also using these trucks, but I would think in this time of rising prices and in decreasing inventory, that would be could be substantial, considering I don't think fire truck parts are easily found or cheap. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Next is Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so we have these KME manufactured vehicles that the company's out of business, so it's hard to get parts. And so we're planning to keep those vehicles on so we can cannibalize some of the older ones to keep the slightly newer ones running. Mr. Sweet talked about that a minute or two ago. But my question is, on truck number 1 on the next slide, it's only like 6 years old, but the cost per mile is like $4.65 or something, or 63. What happened to that truck, and why is it so expensive to run?
Senator Peterson, through the chair. We don't exactly know why. I would hesitate to use the term lemon, but this truck has a lot of downtime. It breaks down frequently. It spends a lot. It has a lot of out of service time. The numbers that you see in the 3rd and 4th columns are the number of outstanding work orders at the time that this spreadsheet was produced. The number of rig swaps is the number of times where the truck couldn't finish its shift, and they had to either have it towed to the shop or drive to the shop and switch into a reserve because the vehicle was not functional and it couldn't operate it anymore. There are times between our reserve fleet and the in-service fleet that we still have a truck to put people in, and so we put them in old engines and rescue vehicles that are completely unsuitable.
Just one quick follow-up. And so, that's interesting. So you you're planning to buy a new one of these from a different manufacturer maybe this next time? And do these come with warranties? Is there a 50,000 mile warranty on these or anything?
Through the chair, there is a warranty. I don't know exactly what it is. Truck 1 in particular is, well, truck 12 and truck 1. They're outside of the warranty period, but truck 1 was bonded in 2016. We received it in 2017. We will purchase another one. We don't really get to say who the manufacturer is going to be. I mean, there's a process for that. But it's likely that we'll replace it with a straight stick, which is what the other 3 are, which means it doesn't require 2 drivers. It reduces the complexity and probably.
Number 1 is the one that requires 2 drivers.
Truck 1 is the one that requires 2 drivers. It's the one that's in that picture there.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I just want to note we have just under 20 minutes left in this work session, and we do have another work session starting at 1 p.m. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I would guess that the cost of that definitely relates to the fact that it takes 2 drivers. But probably there's some other elements buried in there. I'm curious about engine 12. The highest number of miles and the lowest cost of the reserve fleet per mile. What's the special sauce of that truck or engine?
Thank you for the question. Assemblymember Constant through the chair. First of all, just a remark. The operating costs are only the maintenance and fuel costs. It doesn't include the personnel costs.
Okay.
Are not reflected in those figures. That's just the shop, what they track. And I don't exactly know why engine 12 has more. It is not one of the newer rigs. It's a little bit older and is lower to operate, but it is a 2-wheel drive vehicle. It doesn't operate on the hillside. The hillside rigs are 4-wheel drive. They're more complex, more components, and they operate in harsher conditions. I don't know all the reasons that contribute to that.
This philosophically, to Mr. Dunbar's point, I think even though these, as has been stated, these dollars are unrestricted, I see some high value in making sure to go towards the operational costs of, or the capital costs of the fire department who's earning these dollars for the municipality. And so I'm somewhere in between the 2 points. I am glad to hear that the plan is to use both the bond and these funds to take care of some of this backlog, because I think that cuts against the arguments that might oppose this section of the resolution. Maybe not, though, of course, we'll have to have that debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant, and I believe we can move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go ahead and move on to this one, which I believe is probably going to take the most time. But I do want to put it up to you, Madam Chair. If you'd rather me go to M&O first and go over those slides, I can do that. Director Shear's here, or I can just continue on in this fashion.
However you want to proceed.
Okay. We have more people here for ACDA. So I just have, as we bring this up, Director Peterson's going to go through the slides for the potential purchase of this building, and she'll walk you through it. We do have subject matter experts here. ACDA is here. The executive director is here. He's represented by counsel. Mr. Bob Owens from the municipality is representing ACDA. For the municipality, Ben Bowman is representing the municipality. This is a topic that is currently in negotiations. So some of the details the lawyers will tell us we're not allowed to talk about. I just want to preface that. Ms. Peterson.
Thank you. So we'll go through a little history. In 2018, we entered into a lease agreement, which I believe that you guys received, and that was between the MOA, APDA, and ACDA for the building that's located at 716 West 4th Avenue. It started as a 1-year lease on October 23rd with 19 one-year extension options. So this is a year-to-year lease that we do have currently. There's a stipulation in the lease that says that the rent shall increase by consumer price index for all urban consumers for Anchorage. So basically the Anchorage CPI inflationary increases every single year. In 2019, the Anchorage Police Department occupied the building at 716 West 4th Avenue, and they currently use it as their headquarters. And pursuant to the lease agreement in section 3, there is a right of first offer to purchase. And so the municipality entered into negotiations with ACDA for the purchase of the 716 West 4th Avenue building. Currently, the lease cost to the municipality is a little over $1.7 million. There is a stipulation in the lease agreement that we reimburse ACDA for the MISA cost, so that's an additional cost to us. So in total for 2022, it is a little over $1.9 million that we have in the cost of that building. Based on an 8% estimated CPI increase for 2023, our lease would go up to $1.8 million. Including the MISA, we would be just over $2 million in 2023. And in the interest of time, I won't read to you the numbers in the table, but the rest of the CPI increases were estimated at 5%. And so you can see those adjustments in the out years of 24, 25, and 26.
And Ms. Peterson, if I could just pause you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
So CPI would go up, but presumably if we didn't buy it and invested the money, we would also have investment earnings. So isn't this a little?
No, because we would have to not have the lease with we're going to continue, either the APD moves out of the building, or if they continue to occupy it, we will continue to pay the lease cost. So we won't actually get that revenue. It's still going to be an expense out in those years. So
Well, but if you took a chunk of money to buy the whole thing,
Yep.
presumably then that lost opportunity is the investment on that chunk over the same period. I guess I'm just saying it doesn't feel like apples to apples. And I don't necessarily oppose it, but I think it's a little misleading to say, oh, we would save this much money, but you're not incorporating what we would earn by not paying for the entire building. Do you see what I mean?
No, because we would still have to pay our lease payment unless the APD
Right, but
went up.
every year, not in a big chunk.
Right, but that's where, so the next one you'll see is that based on the financing of the purchase price that we've agreed upon for the building, our estimated annual debt payment for that financing would be $1.483 million. And so that is our annual payment for the financing of the building. And so the next table down is what you'll see is the difference of if we continue to lease the building compared to what we would pay in an annual debt payment. So in 2023, the estimated savings is $579,000, a little over, and then it escalates for each year based on the fact that the lease agreement would continue to, but we have a flat annual debt payment. So in total,
I think I maybe misunderstood what you're trying to show. You're just trying to show the difference in those costs, but you haven't yet addressed the loss that we wouldn't have by holding that money. So maybe you're going to do that later.
So I'm not sure I'm understanding, because we're going to finance the cost, where it's not actually going to be a lump sum cash payment from this.
Okay,
We're going to
I
finance
see.
it.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so at the end of the 4 years that we've calculated out, we would have an estimated savings of almost $2.9 million from purchasing the building compared to continuing to lease the building.
And Mr. Constant has a question.
Thank you. You mentioned a purchase price, but we haven't seen a purchase price anywhere.
I'm glad you said that, is because we have an AO. So we have a draft AO that we have prepared that identifies the financing options, and then it would be the approval of the financing and the purchase of the building. And that details all of the agreements so far from those negotiations. So we have negotiated a purchase price of $18 million. And then what you're seeing in the AR for the SEMT appropriation is a $2 million down payment. And so what that would do is the ability to pay $2 million to ACDA immediately after approval. And then we would move forward with our financing option and reimburse ourselves that $2 million and pay them the remainder $16 million of that purchase price.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, can I just make a clarifying comment?
Sure.
That was a lot of information that was just thrown at everyone. And so I just want to recap that we have this lease with this building. Inside of the lease, there's a CPI escalator every single year because of the inflationary factors that we're facing right now, we know our lease payments are going to go up at least next year, and if inflation continues year after year. So when we drafted this, what we tried to do is we tried to we only gave you 4 years extra because that was what's in the seat. We didn't want to confuse you with a 20-year number or something like that. But based on what inflation does, that will impact your lease payment. And what we believe is, in this case, owning is cheaper than leasing, and it would significantly free up a significant amount of money year over year in the general operating budget.
Thank you. I have 3 members in the queue. First is Mr. Cross, then Mr. Solt, and then Mr. Dunbar,
Okay,
and then
so
Mr. Constant.
yeah. So a couple things here. First, when you're looking at your loss of potential earnings and investment income, you have to have an identified investment so you can compare it to. So I completely, because there is a cost factor in money. So if you were to say, like, if instead of paying this off, we took this money and reinvested it, what would it be? Well, we would first have to identify what that investment would be and what those perceived earnings would be, because it would have to be greater than their 5%. The lease, it looks like,
That's what I was trying to say.
yeah, no, but we don't, without an investment identified to compare it to, then we can only compare it to the cost savings that we have.
Exactly.
And I think the 5% is conservative. You just go in, we're at 7.5%, 8% for this year. It's going to go up, and then you've averaged out 5%, but I think that's conservative. So that's on the low end. So then the other question has to come with this, and maybe Mike Robbins can speak to this, because I'm interested in, if we do purchase the building, what percentage of the building is currently used by the police department, and is ACDA interested in taking a piece of it and releasing some of those for parking? But we can get into that once you finish. You still have a couple slides to go here out of interest of time, but I'm also looking, once we own the property, is there income potential with leasing out any of the additional parking spaces, or what the capacity of it is? Thank you.
The full building is occupied by APD.
Oh, it's 100%?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I guess there would be no other revenue generating sources from that, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Next is Mr. Solt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So maybe a question for Chief in the background. Simple question. So I assume you want to stay in this building because I've heard anecdotally it's kind of difficult for some officers during shift change out, come downtown, traffic, so forth, so on. So I assume you do want to stay in this building?
Unless you can buy the old,
He keeps pushing for the BP building.
I want the BP building.
This is why you have no risk director's
But other than that, yes.
Okay, just for the
And just for the record here, hold on, folks. Chief Curl is stating that he would like actually the BP building. And he doesn't have a microphone, so that may not have
That's for
been
the health
picked
department.
up.
And then otherwise, yes. And then he also said otherwise, yes.
And he also said, as Mr. Solt said, otherwise, yes to the current building. Anything else, Mr. Solt?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Next is Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so it's always interesting. I remember when we first entered into this arrangement, and so Chris just informed me that this asking price from ACDA is $4 million more than what I think they initially paid for it. And so for my questions are, what's their debt? What's their debt remaining? And second, and apologies, Mr. Robbins is in the room. Mr. Robbins is a appointed official of municipality. To some degree, we are negotiating with ourselves. We control the ACDA, and we could talk to the lawyers a little bit about this. We're going to have to, because we could also write an ordinance, you correct me if I'm wrong, that said something like, the ACDA's charter is changed, so now it will sell us this building for $14 million, or whatever it is. Something we could make ACDA whole. We could maybe even give them a little bit more money than they otherwise would have had. But we bring down the purchase price for an entity we own.
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, Larry Christensen, acting municipal attorney. So there's a couple facets to your question, I think. Does the ACDA run pursuant to municipal code? It does. It's a creature of municipal code. Obviously, in this negotiation, our office has built a wall, and we have two separate attorneys, one working on behalf of ACDA and one working on behalf of the municipality. And as an attorney yourself, you know that because we built that wall, we don't cross over in that information. Could the assembly change the code? Boy, I think we're going to have to do some legal research on that. I mean, certainly under the code, my recollection is that the assembly can disband ACDA, and then we get all their assets. So could you change it so that we get one of its assets for cheaper, potentially?
Could we disband it for, no, I'm serious, could we disband it for a week, take this asset and reform them? I mean, is it worth $4 million or $5 million to the municipality, to ourselves, to be held over the barrel by one of our own entities for our police department?
Through the chair. So I've asked Mr. Rob Owens to come up. He is the attorney that's representing ACDA. And I'm going to let him speak to that.
Mike, I'm not trying to, Mr. Robbins, this is in no way am I coming after your position here. I just think we're just in a really interesting position where we are paying a premium to an entity that we control well over what we paid for it after having paid them quite a lot of money so that we can have our own police headquarters.
I would just point, this is Bob Owens, Mr. Dunbar. I would point out that the code also requires...
Bob, I think you should speak a little bit more into the microphone here.
The code also requires the municipality to pay fair market value when it acquires property. So if you were to, you probably could create a scenario where you change code and modify them and all of that and accomplish that purpose. But as matters stand now, we typically do have an obligation to pay fair market value for property. And I believe that this is a less than fair market value acquisition as it is, as it's proposed.
Do we, when we transfer property between departments, do we pay a fair market value for that?
It's an unusual situation. It's the first time I've really dealt with that. So
for example, we technically own the school district buildings. If one of those came back to us and we started using it for a purpose, would we pay them however many tens of millions of dollars it would take to acquire one of their buildings?
I don't know why not. They are a separate entity, right? And ACDA is structured as a semi-separate entity.
To a degree, I'm just sort of rolling out hypotheticals here, because that's kind of what attorneys do. And I understand the ACDA has a sort of semi-fiduciary, they have a fiduciary duty to someone. Who's their fiduciary duty to? The board and the director?
Well, to the citizens of Anchorage, to the municipality.
Well, that's so interesting, right? So it's not the ACDA as an independent entity, it's the people that are paying them for this asset.
So no, they are an independent authority, so they are self-sustaining. They don't have, it's not a department. It's part of general government. We don't give them any money. Like when we appropriate their budget, it's appropriated in the enterprise utilities section. Because they're all independent and they are self-sustaining. So it's not necessarily to the citizens of Anchorage as taxpayers, but as users of their assets. The parking garages and the meters and everything where they get revenue from, because that's what supports them.
But in this case, we are the user of the service and the asset.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So we are actually out of time. It's 12:51, and I have two other members in the queue. We do have another work session starting at 1 p.m. I'm assuming members will want to continue this discussion since we haven't been able to get through.
I got through 7 and 12, that's good.
Next in the queue, I have Mr. Constant and then Mr. Cross, and then I'm hoping we can wrap up in a few minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. First, I will start by saying there's this old adage of old age and treachery will always beat youth and exuberance. And Bob Owens should never represent anyone but the municipality. That's no strike against Mr. Bowman, but I feel like we're at a substantial deficit in this conversation. If our best attorney in these issues is working for the other guy. Yeah, and so
Best attorney and you.
He's the $450 million man. So
I hope
wherever
that's
that
what they
ends
pay
up
you,
to be.
Bob. Wait.
I missed that series.
So, Mike, a simple question: who paid for tenant improvements when we secured the building?
We did, as part of the lease agreement.
The municipality did.
Yes.
Right. So, an argument of the fair market value we have to look closely at when we think about it. We purchased it off of the foreclosure market. So, the initial acquisition was well below market value, or it was the market value, really, because it was purchased in that manner. But then we put a ton of money. Do you know how much we put into the building for tenant improvements? Can we get that number?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Because I think between the 18 and 14 and the tenant improvements is probably a place I'll be comfortable landing.
Mr. Constant, now we're getting into the negotiations a little bit, but let me
Yes,
just give you some information. The building was originally purchased, I think, for about $15.5 million.
14.
I just checked with Mr. Roberts, that's what he told me. 15.5. But
The ordinance
regardless,
itself says 14.
they owe $13 million still, and the fiscal position of ACDA. And also, I believe the tax assessed value of this particular building is in the neighborhood of $17 million. So, yeah, it's in the neighborhood of about $17 million. So, as Mr. Owens indicated, he believes that the deal that we struck is actually a little bit less than fair market value if you were to put this on the market. So, since we do believe we have negotiated a fair deal for all parties, but that's the negotiated price.
Right, I get that. And so my argument back, and I'm not in a negotiating room, and again, the guy on the other side of the table, the guy I want on my side of the table, is that we paid 14 according to the ordinance. I'm not sure where an additional sum of money came from. I would like that information as well to know if we spent more than was authorized. That would be surprising. And then for me, I need to understand what we sunk into that building to understand what it's actually worth to us. And so, anyhow, because we're, like Mr. Dunbar said, selling to ourselves and buying it from ourselves, and it's a very interesting position. Now, all that said, question for Mr. Robbins, what does this do to your operation if this deal goes through at this level?
Mike.
We can pick this up at another
If you
meeting.
can answer just briefly, Mr. Robbins, if you want to come up to a microphone, please.
I thought you were playing loud enough, Mike. The radio guy in me, I'm used to projecting, I guess. Through the chair to Assemblymember Constant, the question was, what does this do to our operation?
Yeah, what's the mission and purpose of this sale? What does it do for you?
Well, what it does, first of all, is it helps us to reestablish some reserves that our board required for us to keep a cash reserve. And it also gives us money to further development downtown and work on some of the projects that we've got working. So most of this money will go back into development projects that are currently underway or currently contemplated by the authority. The money won't be used for operations, it'll be used for development.
So I would ask for one last thing, since we have a little time, maybe just a little white paper on where you go from here if this is approved, so we can have it in the packet when we get to this one.
Sure, as long as I know what's expected in the white paper, we'll do that to generate that for you, no problem.
It's your argument.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. And then Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I'll be brief. So the question just comes down to, because since we are negotiating with ourselves here, in which hand do you believe we can do the most good, right? Because if you cut the price of it and keep more money in the general, then will that be more beneficial? Or will paying market value and transferring money back to the ACDA to make downtown development? But I imagine the one-on-one project we talked about yesterday here, where that was online, that might have been at the CEDC meeting. They talked about some development. I imagine they would be using some of the funds to help get that going. But I guess the question then comes in, how we determine it, whether you approve the sale or not, in which hand do you think the money will do the best benefit for the taxpayer. Okay? Will downtown development ACDA be more beneficial in allowing them to continue on their goal, or does the money we're paying less for the building or continuing to go down this route of juggling CPI against the future lease? Will that be more beneficial? And will it be more beneficial in the general fund? And I guess my preference is the ACDA at least invest, and they're looking to invest, they're looking for growth, whereas general fund doesn't approach money as an investment. Mostly they look at expense. It typically doesn't look at what is our ROI, what is that. But it just depends on where your thought process is on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross, and we will have to leave it at that for now as it's 12:58. This is item 14J, AR 2022-332 on the November 9 regular meeting agenda, which is on a Wednesday. I will talk afterwards, or Assembly leadership will confer with the administration on another work session and how we may continue this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Ms. Novosky and team, for the information you provided. With that, we are adjourned, and we will start up here in just a few minutes with the next work session.